Your entire dating pool was roughly 150 people. That was it. That was the whole app. No swiping left, no swiping right, just turning your head and looking at every single person you would ever realistically meet in your entire life. You are Grug. You are somewhere between 16 and 20 years old, which is basically middle age. You have seen the same 149 faces every single day since birth. And somehow, you are supposed to find a partner in there. So how exactly did that work? Because it did work. We are all here. Something happened. And the answer is so much weirder, funnier, and more elaborate than you are expecting. Let us start with the basics of Grug's world because context matters a lot here. For roughly 99% of human history, people lived in small nomadic bands. Anthropologists call the cognitive limit on stable social groups Dunbar's number, and it sits at around 150 people. That is the number your brain can actually maintain real relationships with. Beyond that, social cohesion starts to collapse. So bands stayed small, they moved constantly following food, and for long stretches of the year, your entire social universe was maybe 20 to 50 people. Your immediate band, your family, people you had known forever. This is not a great setup for romance. This is a great setup for knowing exactly who left the mammoth scraps out again. Now here is where it gets interesting. Grug was not stupid. Grug's ancestors were not stupid. The human brain had already been doing complex social calculus for hundreds of thousands of years by this point, and people figured out, pretty quickly, that marrying your cousin repeatedly for 10,000 generations was a bad idea. They did not know the genetics. They just noticed things kept going sideways, so they developed rules. Exogamy, the practice of deliberately finding partners outside your immediate group, which sounds civilized and organized until you remember that outside your immediate group was, statistically, a forest full of things trying to eat you. So how do you meet someone who is not in your band? This is the problem. This is the whole problem. And the solution that prehistoric humans landed on is genuinely one of the most fascinating social technologies ever invented, and almost nobody talks about it. Once or twice a year, bands would travel to aggregation sites. Let that land for a second. Seasonal aggregation sites, basically prehistoric festivals. Multiple bands, sometimes dozens of them, converging on a single location that had something everybody needed. A river with a reliable salmon run. A valley where herds congregated. A flint outcrop where everyone came to resupply their tool kits. Archaeological evidence for these gatherings goes back tens of thousands of years. Sites like Pinnacle Point in South Africa or various late Upper Paleolithic locations in Europe show evidence of large periodic gatherings. Lots of people, lots of exchange, lots of material from far away suddenly appearing in one place. And what do you think happened when bands of young people who had been staring at the same 40 faces for 6 months suddenly ran into hundreds of strangers? Exactly that. But here is the crazy part. It was not casual. It was not random. It was elaborate. Humans showed up to these gatherings prepared. And by prepared, I mean they were absolutely trying to look impressive, and the evidence for this is sitting in museums right now. Let us talk about ochre. Ochre is a naturally occurring iron oxide pigment. It comes in reds, oranges, yellows, and humans have been deliberately collecting, grinding, and using it for at least 300,000 years. At Pinnacle Point in South Africa, researchers found ochre being processed around 164,000 years ago. At various Upper Paleolithic sites across Europe, we find ochre crayons, ochre-stained grinding stones, ochre buried with bodies. People were mixing it, blending it, applying it to objects, to tools, to themselves. Body painting and decoration was, in all likelihood, part of how prehistoric humans signaled status, group identity, health, and availability. Think of it as your profile photo, except it is smeared on your face and the photographer is you. And the filter is mud. Grug had a vibe. Grug was trying to communicate that vibe. Grug just had to do it with rocks and plants instead of a ring light, and it gets better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. Ornaments, beads specifically. One of the oldest forms of human personal decoration are shell beads, and we are not talking recent history here. Nassarius crocyanus shell beads from Blombo's cave in South Africa date to around 75,000 years ago. Similar perforated shells turn up at sites across North Africa and the Middle East around the same time period. These were not found near food. They were not tools. They were worn. They were personal. They were, archaeologists strongly suspect, markers of identity, group membership, and social signaling. In other words, jewelry, prehistoric jewelry. Grug was accessorizing. Grug was doing it 75,000 years ago. Now let us talk about courtship gifts, because this one is my personal favorite piece of evidence. At various archaeological sites, researchers find what they call exchange networks. High-quality flint, shell, ochre, sometimes animal teeth or feathers, showing up hundreds or even thousands of kilometers from where they originated. How did they get there? Trade, gift exchange, and a significant chunk of anthropological thinking suggests that much of this long-distance exchange was tied to alliance building and marriage networks. You did not just show up at the aggregation festival with your face painted and hope for the best. You brought something valuable, something that said, I am competent, I traveled far, I have connections, I am a good bet. Grug brought gifts. Grug was trying. You have to respect that. But here is where we need to talk about the actual competition side of this, because it was not all romantic gift-giving and beads. Physical condition mattered enormously, and not in a vague, aspirational way. In a you are literally being evaluated as a survival investment way. Symmetry, posture, muscle condition, the condition of your teeth, whether you moved like someone who had not been recently mauled. These were all signals of underlying health and genetic quality. Researchers studying hunter-gatherer societies today, as well as the anthropological record, find consistent evidence that physical indicators of health and developmental stability were central to mate choice. This was not superficial. This was rational. In a world where medical care was a mos poultice and a wish, marrying someone who was clearly in excellent physical condition was genuinely one of the smartest decisions you could make. Grug had abs. Grug had abs because Grug walked 15 kilometers a day and carried things. Nobody was going to the gym. Nobody needed to. The lifestyle came preloaded with the consequences. Now status. Let us talk about status, because status was complicated and interesting, and not what modern people assume. In egalitarian hunter-gatherer bands, which is what most prehistoric human groups appear to have been, high status did not mean owning things. You could not really own things. You moved constantly. Owning things was a burden. High status meant skills. It meant knowledge. It meant being the person who knew where the water was in a drought, or who could nap a flint point that did not shatter on the first aurochs. It meant being generous, because generosity in a sharing economy is how you build the social debt network that keeps you alive when your own hunt fails. So the attractive person at the prehistoric aggregation festival was not the one with the biggest pile of stuff. It was the one everyone kept deferring to, the one whose opinion people asked for, the one who gave things away and somehow always had more. That person was a very good evolutionary bet, and everyone at the festival could see it. And it gets worse for Grug, or better. Honestly, hard to say, because here is the social pressure that nobody ever mentions. At these aggregation events, you were not just being evaluated by potential partners. You were being evaluated by their entire band, because marriage was not just a personal decision. It was a diplomatic event. Bands were forming alliances through marriages, creating obligations, building networks that would mean in 3 years, when there was a bad winter, you could show up at a neighboring band's camp and be fed instead of turned away. Marriage was foreign policy. Grug was not just trying to impress one person. Grug was essentially a trade delegation. No pressure, Grug. Now let us talk about what happened if it did not work out at the festival, because the aggregation site was seasonal. It was not a permanent place. Everyone dispersed again. And if you found someone and it seemed promising but nothing was formalized, you now had to wait until next year, or send word through the network, or travel. Some anthropologists believe that the long-distance shell bead exchange networks doubled as communication and courtship networks, a gift sent forward through a chain of bands, a message that arrived months later, prehistoric long-distance texting, agonizingly slow, extremely expensive, and with a roughly equal chance of arriving at the wrong person. Grug left a very nice shell necklace with a mutual friend in the next valley. Grug is still waiting for a reply. It has been 8 months. The mutual friend might have been eaten by a cave bear. It is unclear. And for all the humor here, it is worth pausing on the genuine strangeness and beauty of this picture. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans found their partners through networks of trust, gift exchange, personal reputation, physical skill, social grace, and a once-a-year gathering where everyone showed up looking their absolute best and hoping. The whole system was built on the same things it is still built on. Do you seem healthy? Are you generous? Do the people who know you well seem to like and respect you? Can you actually do the things you claim to do? The tools were ochre and shell beads instead of a filtered selfie. The festival was a salmon river instead of a rooftop bar. But Grug was asking the same questions you are asking. And Grug found someone. Because you are here. Next time you spend 40 minutes picking a profile photo, remember that Grug ground his ochre by hand, applied it in a river reflection, walked 3 weeks to the festival, and then had to also impress her entire band's council of elders before anyone agreed to anything. Grug did not swipe right. Grug earned it. If you want to know what Grug actually ate at that festival, or how prehistoric humans handled the ones who showed up to the gathering and absolutely did not follow the social rules, those videos exist on this channel, and they are exactly as chaotic as you are hoping. Stick around. Grug has a lot more to explain.